Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar on policy payments and plannings. My name is Bicknell. I lead AHDB's Market Intelligence work, so taking us right through from what's happening at farm level in terms of prices, in terms of production, right through to what's happening to the retail and food service markets and the consumer end. One of the aspects we've done quite a lot to look at in recent times has been looking about the policy impact of some major changes that are happening at trade policy level, but also domestic farm policy level, particularly as that starts to gather pace, at least here in England. It's probably a bit of an understatement to say that we live in uncertain times. As I mentioned, that trade deal with Europe probably gives us a bit more clarity, a bit more certainty, certainly about our trading relationship. And Defra's announcements last year on future farm policy certainly give a bit more clarity about farming's future, at least here in England. We're going to hear from Defra on the Ag Transition Plan shortly, and we're really pleased to say that I've got Chris Maxwell, who's Defra Policy Team Leader, joining us to run through some of the headlines of that policy announcement. After we've heard from Chris, we're going to throw it open to Oliver McEntyre, who's the National Agricultural Strategy Director with Barclays. We've also got Robert Sullivan, who's Director and Head of Farm Business Consultancy at GSC Grays. And really pleased that we've got Duncan Nelless, who's a farmer from Northumberland, joining us as well. So we'll get a bit of discussion going with the panel after we've heard the headlines from Defra. Before we move on, though, just a little bit of housekeeping. First thing to say is that today's webinar does qualify for PIG Pro points. So if you didn't have that option when you signed in, email one of the events team and we'll sort that out for you. Second thing is to stress that all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar, and we plan on finishing at 2 o'clock. We will record today's webinar and it will be published on YouTube and the AHDB website if you want to revisit any of the content. So no need for furious scribbling. You'll be able to watch it back at your leisure. We'll also ask you to answer a few questions at the end of the webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time to complete the post-event survey and give us a bit of feedback so that we can improve the quality and the type of webinars that we run for you. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'm hoping we'll get quite a few questions that come in, not least given the expertise we have on the panel today. You can do these by clicking on the button on the right-hand side of the screen. As I say, just keep those questions coming and we'll pick up as many as we can in the discussion. If you do have any technical issues, if you're having problems with the screen or audio, again, use that question panel to raise any issues for us, and we'll try and sort that out as the webinar's ongoing as well. So without further ado, we'll move on, and I'll hand over to Chris, who's Defra's Policy Team Leader. As I said, please get your questions in nice and early, and if there's any questions that we don't pick up today, we'll perhaps see what we can pick up as part of our EU exit and policy web pages as well. One thing I should say, I suppose, I guess that some of you will have studied in quite a bit of detail the Defra's Ag Transition Plan and announcement that came out back in, I think it was the end of November now that came out. So if you've gone through the 66 pages or so that gave the detail, the next few minutes is probably a bit of a reminder, a bit of refresh in terms of the headlines. If you have only looked at the headlines, then or kind of picked up what's in the farming press, then hopefully you'll get a bit more detail of what's involved and the different aspects that the transition plan and future policy is starting to look at. So Chris, I'll hand over to you, ask you to put your camera and microphone on, and over to you.
Thanks, Phil, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name's Chris Maxwell, as Phil said. I work on developing the animal health and welfare pathway in Defra, which is one of the kind of policy interventions that we're developing as part of our agricultural transition plan. And that's what it's the agricultural transition plan I'm here to talk to you about today. It sets out the changes we're going to make to agricultural policy over the agricultural transition period with a focus on 2021 to 2024. And it explains what some of those changes might start to mean in practice. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to whiz through this a bit today, so we've got plenty of time for questions at the end. I'll talk to you about the agricultural transition, changes to direct payments, our kind of concept around environmentally sustainable farming, transition support and sustainable productivity, regulation enforcement, and the kind of engagement and comms that we're doing as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we've left the EU, we've got an opportunity to shape agricultural policy to suit our needs, wants, priorities. We want to put environmentally sustainable farming kind of at the centre of our new approach to England's agricultural system. We want to see farming in the countryside supporting environmental biodiversity and climate change goals by protecting and enhancing the natural environment. Our future policy will help farmers continue to provide a supply of healthy, homegrown produce to high environmental and animal welfare standards. We will be making changes to agricultural policy over a 7-year transition period, which runs from 2021 to 2027, giving farmers and land managers time to adapt and prepare. We're talking here about evolution from the old system, not an overnight revolution, and that's why it's over a longer time period. We want to learn from new approaches and evolve the components of our policy so that they can improve and develop over time. This means that during the early years, we won't be able to answer all the questions that people rightly have about how this is going to work. But we know this is frustrating, and we know farming operates to long time frames, and certainty and planning are really key to that. We'll give you as much certainty as we can as soon as we can. But we've got to get this. We want to get this right. It's kind of kind of not quite once in a lifetime, but it's certainly a big chance to get things right. And we need to learn and we need to improve as we go. But we want to be as open as we can do with everybody who has an interest in these changes. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've got some guiding principles for managing the transition. We want to co-design things with the people who need to use them. We want this to work for our users, for our farmers and land managers, and we want to help people do the right things for their businesses, for the climate and for the environment. As we go through this, we want to really be earning people's trust in our systems and our approach, and again, that co-design is really a big part of ensuring that we have the systems and that approach is as good as possible. We can get that trust as quickly as and keep that trust. We want to make things clear and simple. We know that sometimes previously that hasn't been the case, so we want to make it as it's one of our guiding principles now. We want things to be fair and reasonable, and we want this to work. We really do. And what we really want is a focus on achieving outcomes, not on the kind of minutiae of every single detail. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the biggest changes is the phasing out of direct payments. This is going to mean reductions to the basic payment scheme from 2021, and then to delinked payments when these replace BPS. The money saved by direct payment reductions will be directly reinvested into English farming and agriculture through our new schemes. So the money isn't going anywhere; it's still going to be there. The phasing out will start from the scheme year 2021, and it will be done gradually and fairly, with those in receipt of the highest payments facing the biggest reductions. And that's what the table on the screen shows you. The last payments will be made for the 2027 scheme year. This will allow those in receipt of payments sufficient time to make changes to their business and get involved in our agri-environment and other schemes, so that they can be supported and remain viable without direct payment. Next slide, please. So here you can see the balance of reductions in direct payment and then the kind of the increases in and the proportions of those increases in investment. The government's committed to provide the same cash total to the sector in each year of this Parliament. We want to see a thriving sector, and we will gradually reduce and redirect the money saved from direct payments, including into our new agri-environment schemes and funding to improve farm prosperity. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the 2021 simplifications that we're doing. Due to the basic payment scheme, we're going to remove the greening rules. That's things like crop diversification, ecological focus areas, and permanent grassland rules, and removing entitlement usage as well. So yeah, that will mean farmers no longer have entitlements removed if they're not used to claiming payment at least every 2 years. We're going to remove the need for cross-border applications. So farmers with land in England and another part of the UK will apply separately to each part of the UK. And we're going to extend the deadline for farmers to apply for force majeure exceptional circumstances from 15 days to 8 weeks. We're also going to allow applicants to submit supporting documents up to 25 calendar days after the BPS application without a penalty or reduction to their payment, and extend the period in which farmers may make changes to their application without being penalised. We're also going to remove the requirement to inspect eligibility for direct payments at a given rate and the associated rules on inspection selection, and modify the rules around what can be considered an obvious error on the part of a direct payment applicant. Next slide, please. So as we phase out direct payments, we plan to replace BPS with de-linked payments. This means that farmers and land managers will not need to farm the land to receive payment until they have been phased out. Once payments have been de-linked, that's taking the farming away from the payment, recipients will be able to receive direct payments even if they choose to stop farming altogether. And we plan to de-link payments in 2024. Eligibility might be based on a reference period. It may be necessary to have claimed for BPS for a certain time period before being able to claim de-link payments. We're also looking at offering farmers the option of a one-off lump sum in place of any further direct payments. This is called the lump sum exit scheme, and we'll hold a consultation with farmers, land managers and stakeholders on the details of both de-linking and lump sum payments. Next slide, please. So I've talked a little bit about environmentally sustainable farming and rewarding that through our new agricultural system. Our approach is based on providing farmers with as many opportunities to get involved as possible and offering the maximum flexibility as we can for them to manage their agreements. There are new agreements and also extensions, so you can engage as you wish. We want to make sure that the environmental work farmers and other land managers are already undertaking through CAP agri-environment schemes is not lost as we shift to a new environmental land management scheme. Signing up to a CS agreement offers a viable long-term source of income still. And countryside stewardship schemes will remain open until 2023 for agreements starting in January 2024. After that, there'll be no more CS applications as the new environmental land management scheme will be up and running. Anyone who's in a countryside stewardship scheme from 2021 who secures a place in the environmental land management scheme will be able to withdraw from their countryside stewardship scheme at annual exit points without penalty. And improvements to countryside stewardship schemes are under continual review. We're continuing to focus on making agreement management more efficient so we can get payments out as quickly as possible. We're also looking to reduce burdens for agreement holders to help improve the experience of the scheme for customers, make it better basically. Next slide, please. There are also some other incentives which will remain available for woodland creation. So they're on the screen there. I won't read them out again, but woodland creation and maintenance will remain available into the agricultural transition period. It delivers benefits like woodland carbon and flood management, that kind of thing. So we're keen to keep those going. We will, next slide, please. We will, however, be launching a pilot of our tree health scheme in 2021 with a full scheme to launch in 2024. We think this will better support land managers to respond to tree health threats. The pilot will explore and refine future payment rates and structures. And for participants, there will be support for felling and treatment of diseased trees in certain situations and restocking following felling. The full scheme, as I said, comes into operation in 2024 when the Countryside Stewardship, Woodland Capital, Tree Health, Restoration and Improvement grants will stop. Next slide, please. So now we come to it's one of the really important parts of our new approach to agriculture, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is underpinned by the concept of public money for public goods. The public goods we're talking about include clean and plentiful water, clean air, protection from and mitigation of environmental hazards, mitigation of and adaptation to climate change, thriving plants and wildlife, and beauty, heritage, and engagement. The Environmental Land Management Scheme will be a powerful vehicle to achieve the goals of the 25-year Environment Plan and our commitment to net zero emissions, while also supporting our rural economy and land managers. The scheme has been developed with the sector, and collaborating with and co-designing with farmers and land managers will produce the best scheme. We want one that works for its users and that achieves our goals for the sector, the environment, biodiversity, and climate change. Payments in this scheme will be set to make sure that making environmental and climate change improvements is financially viable and fair for farmers and land managers. In developing our approach to calculating payments, we are learning lessons from current schemes and testing aspects through tests and trials. We're acutely aware that payments need to provide a fair return to participants if environmental land management is to deliver on our challenging ambitions. Next slide, please. So within environmental land management, there are three component levels set out on the screen there. And what we're really trying to do with these is to change the way that we pay for public goods to make it different, less prescriptive, and to give more choice and flexibility. Length of agreements will be flexible according to individual circumstances and what farmers and land managers want to deliver through their agreements. The environmental land management is split into three components on the screen, and we'll go into more detail in the following slides, but the components work as follows. So the sustainable farming incentive component of environmental land management is to be open and accessible to all farmers and to help them contribute to important environmental, climate change, and animal health and welfare outcomes. The local nature recovery and landscape recovery components will be for those who want to go even further to achieve outcomes in a local area or at a landscape and whole ecosystem scale. Farmers and land managers will have flexibility to decide what they want to deliver under each component part and how they want to go about it. We'll provide guidance and advice from trusted sources as well to help people plan. Next slide, please. The first component, SFI, is the most focused level of engagement and has been designed to be easy for all farmers and land managers to engage with. The SFI will focus on encouraging environmentally sustainable farming and forestry on individual farms. It focuses on generating valuable practices and outcomes that are most effective when delivered at scale. So when farmers across the country are doing them. So examples of the types of actions we envisage paying for at this level include, and this isn't a complete list, nutrient management, field margins, so buffer strips, livestock management, soil management, efficient water storage and use, integrated pest management, field cover crops, and grassland management. Next slide, please. The second component of the environmental land management scheme is local nature recovery. It's aimed wider than SFI. It's focused on providing payment and support for land managers to achieve locally targeted environmental goals. So we're looking for collaboration between land managers to improve the local environment, basically. The types of actions we envisage paying for here include tree, shrub, and or hedge planting and maintenance, habitat creation, restoration and management, popular and also rare wildlife, management and support of rights of way, navigation and infrastructure, public education events and services, natural flood management, protection and enhancement of valued landscape and historical features such as archaeological sites, historic buildings and stone walls. Okay, next slide, please. And then the final component of the environmental land management scheme is landscape recovery. this is the most wide-ranging and ambitious in its scope. We're really talking about things that cover a whole landscape, that kind of landscape scale change, really. So these things are likely to be long-term, and they're likely to be about potentially changing of land use. It's focused on delivering projects that will support the delivery of ambitious environmental commitments. Many of these projects might be really quite key in carbon sequestration, for example. Things that we would envisage paying for under this are forest and woodland creation, restoration and improvement, peatland restoration, and creation or restoration of coastal habitats such as wetlands and salt marshes. Next slide, please. So in terms of timings, we know that many farmers and land managers are eager to undertake new environmental activities sooner rather than the full rollout of the new environmental land management scheme in 2024. So we'll be rolling out some core elements of SFI from 2022. We're currently deciding which elements of the new environmental land management scheme we'll include in the SFI, and we'll give further information as soon as we can ahead of scheme launch in 2022. And then options and support will be gradually expanded throughout until the full rollout of the environmental land management scheme in 2024. So if we can, the next slide, please. And then if we can just jump through this one. I'm not going to tell people how to pronounce things. Moving on from environmental land management, some farmers and land managers might want help and support to work out how best to get their business ready for the transition period. We're offering a range of interventions, including the Farming Investment Fund, which is targeted support for investment in equipment, technology and infrastructure to improve productivity and benefit the environment. The Future Farming Resilience Fund, which will provide funding so farmers can access specialist, trusted support. Farming in protected landscapes, which will help those farmers that are in protected landscapes to diversify their income streams and lay the groundwork for environmental land management. And then my area of work, the animal health and welfare pathway, where we're investing in improved animal health and welfare as we strengthen the regulatory baseline and also improve consumer transparency. Next slide, please. But the changes we make won't just be about funding. By the end of the agricultural transition, we'll have a reformed regulatory regime for agriculture. In 2021, we will start improving the way we manage within the existing rules and processes, including addressing significant areas of concern with cross-compliance. We plan to make the following improvements in 2021, or during 2021. Increasing the use of warning letters instead of defaulting to penalties, changing the verifiable standards to change the threshold for breaches, making a greater range of more proportionate penalties available to the Rural Payments Agency, and improving the effectiveness of risk-based targeting. In our future regulatory regime, we want a clear distinction and coherent relationship between the basic requirements farmers and land managers are obliged to meet by law and scheme standards where they are paid to go beyond this minimum. We will consult soon about the new regulatory approach to be implemented from 2024. We want to take our current thinking and beginning with a programme of engagement this year, work with farmers, land managers and other stakeholders to shape our future regulatory framework. Next slide, please. So really, it's about how you can get involved. Wherever we can, we want to do this in a co-design process, and that certainly is something that I'm really keen on seeing. We've done a lot through the animal health and welfare pathway. We want to co-design our schemes, our policy in partnership with the agricultural sector. We want to engage at every step of the way and to design our services based on the needs of the people using them. And that means that things just work better for everybody in a nutshell. If you want to hear more and you're not already signed up, please do sign up to the Defra e-alerts, and we'll be putting out the opportunities to contribute through there. So please do that. And again, we're putting them on social media and putting things out through farming organisations as well. Next slide, please. Okay, we've also produced a kind of a shorter booklet rather than the kind of the full agricultural transition plan called Farming is Changing, which summarises the content of the agricultural transition plan with particular focus on 2021 and how farmers and land managers can start to prepare for changes. We also have an advisor pack, which is intended as a reference document for you. It contains an overview of the changes with a Q&A section and should help deepen understanding of changes ahead. And we're planning a whole host of other comms activity, including on social media and features in the farming press. Yeah, and we also have a blog, which is on gov.uk, the Future Farming and Countryside Programme blog. So please do have a look at that if you've got a chance as well. Right, and then that was the end of the presentation. The next slide is just a question slide. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Chris. I want to move on and get kind of views of the panel, but just before we do, just a couple of quick questions for you. We'll have more when it comes to later on. But I suppose when I think about the environmental aspect, to what extent is or are future schemes going to recognise things that farmers already do rather than fund new stuff? So I guess you know, point here made by John Firth, who you know, small suckler herd on an upland farm, but does quite a lot already from an environmental perspective. What could he expect in terms of kind of getting recognition and reward for the biodiversity that his farm supports?
Sure. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we're really keen to make sure doesn't happen during this agricultural transition period is that, in essence, people stop doing something and then start them up again at a later date. That just doesn't seem useful, you know, to anybody. In terms of exactly how it will work, that people will get recognised for what they're doing currently. As I understand it, that's still under development. And it's not so the environmental and management scheme is not my area of expertise, but yeah, it is, as I understand it, still under development. I can take that away and we can kind of get back to you with a more full answer if that would be useful.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I think it's the wariness of the unintended consequences, isn't it, of policy. Yeah. Is always a big risk. And then just a quick second one. I mean, one thing that I've noticed from Defra is kind of there's a relative degree of openness in terms of stakeholder engagement, in terms of meetings and organisations. So presumably, you said several times that there's more detail to come. There's more discussion to be had. Presumably, those sorts of consultations are going to continue to be pretty open, and that you know, stuff on, let's say, the lump sum payment initiative, lots of farmers would potentially be able to have their say and feed in through an online consultation. Is that the kind of thing that's being pursued?
Yeah, sure. We are genuinely committed to being as open and kind of transparent with this as possible, and involving people in it as much as we can. And that go back to the kind of the principles on my slide pack of co-design. Wherever we can, we want this to be designed in partnership with the industry, rather than, you know, kind of being a kind of a one-way street. So yeah, I think wherever we can do that, we will be doing that. And I can check with those working on the lump sum exit scheme as to when they might be next kind of able to engage with people.
Great, thank you. Duncan, I want to bring you in now, so if you could pop on your camera and microphone, that would be great. Duncan, maybe the first question for you, and you perhaps want to say a little bit about, I know you farm up in Northumberland, so you might want to say a little bit about your farm, but presumably direct payments are quite significant from your business perspective. They're a big part of the change that's coming. So how are you gearing up for that? What are you doing differently?
Well, we're kind of constant. I mean, I've banged on about it for a long time. We're kind of constantly looking at the sort of business structure, and we've been benchmarking and looking at cost of production. It's an ongoing process for us, and I sometimes think that, like, if we're going to look at it as individual farmers, be preemptive of what's happening, then we'll have to look at what we can do within the farm gate first. So I suppose with a lot of farms, a lot of farms confuse output with net margin. So that's something that's ongoing and we can do at the minute. I think there's in a lot of places as well. You can look at your borrowing structure. This has nothing to do with what's coming down the line, but it can give you hopefully a little bit of an idea about where you can be no matter what happens. And we'll be happy to look at. We're going to be happy to look at schemes. We're involved in HLS at the minute, and we'll be happy to look at schemes. I think the thing about it, and it's not knocking Chris for it, like it's just at the minute there's a lot of lacking of detail in what's coming down the line. I mean, I would say it's very hard to disagree with any of the overview of it. I mean, everyone wants clean water and clean air. How it's going to be delivered and measured, I think, is going to be a real crux of the problem. Not problem, but like it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out.
Yeah, that's good. We'll maybe ask Chris about the measurement one in a moment. Just in terms of the Ag Transition Plan is more than just the direct payments aspect, although that's kind of grabbed the headlines. I suppose one thing my attention goes to is some of the productivity type support, and I'm conscious that probably picks up on some of the areas of rural development funding in the past. But if you were drawing that up, what's on your wish list? What would you want to see Defra funding, supporting, co-financing?
Well, I think you could some environmental work can deliver productivity advantages as well. Some of the capital work that's gone into hedgerows and woodland creation, sort of fencing off areas for woodland creation or riparian strips, subdivision, quite a good investment on grazing farms. So that can do it. Possibly, well, just as an example, something like a solar pump to sort of integrate water systems to keep them out of riparian areas. Those sort of things could deliver on both counts, I would have said. The productivity, yeah. I mean, the farm productivity grants that are on the go at the minute are very handy, though they're generally quite small scale. I think a little bit of government involvement or Defra involvement in research and development would be welcome. Some of the farm productivity stuff, and it is sustainable farming we're looking at, and let's not forget that it's farming, or that's like a lot of people who are doing this job are interested that it remains farming and not park keeping.
Yeah, and that's kind of point that I think Ian Norbury kind of dropped into the questions, of kind of going, is there a risk from future policy that we see money going in different directions and away from agriculture? And I think that's a concern that I pick up at university when I speak to people.
Yeah, and I know it's said an awful lot, but we don't want to export our environmental and footprint somewhere else, do we? And I think that just to make ourselves feel a bit better in this country by not looking after our own food production.
Yeah, and we end up exporting part of our food production industry effectively, don't we, by environmental standards. Thanks, Duncan. I was going to bring in Robert now. So, I mean, Robert, obviously you're working with a number of kind of farm businesses. What sort of challenges are the policy changes creating for some of your customers and clients?
Thank you very much, Phil. Well, maybe it's just worth putting a step back in the fact that currently, if you actually look at the Defra data that comes out each year about farm business incomes, if you actually look at grazing livestock farms, irrespective of where they are, whether they're lowland or FA, the actual income, the only reason they get a positive income is due to the BPS, due to the environmental schemes, due to the diversification income that you have, and actually the profitability from it isn't a profitability from the agricultural element of it, you're actually making a lot in those situations. So the problem that all livestock farmers really have is they're in a situation where they're in a loss-making circumstances now. The BPS income is going to come down. So if you don't actually do anything different, you're out of here. You are not going to have a viable business to continue with going forward. So I think the actual strategy of the government is quite laudable in the fact that most people would actually like to see a profitable farming sector in its own right. The problem is where we are, or where we're starting from, is the fact that the livestock sector per se, from the activities that most of the guys probably sitting here listening to this, is the reason they get up in the morning. It's not to fill in their BPS form, and it's not to look at their wildflowers. It's actually to manage their stock and enjoy that, and you know, do the best job they can. So there's going to have to be quite a radical change in people's attitude towards their businesses if they're going to have a viable future. And actually, just one of the things that, from my point of view, what Duncan was saying in terms of what he does in terms of benchmarking, that is probably going to be a critical part of most people's business strategy going forward. But the selling point for most businesses will be actually how good are they at the moment. Now, if they're only mediocre at the moment, then it's highly likely that with the new scheme, the radical changes might not be, just moving from BPS to ELS might not be enough. They might have to do significantly more to their business to ensure they've got a viable future. So what am I trying to say? There are going to be serious challenges, but the challenges aren't necessarily, it's going to be as a result of the policy, not because of the policy itself. I think is a positive step forward away from just receiving a payment just for being occupying the land, but the businesses are going to have to make some radical changes over the next few years.
So I do, Robert, completely agree with you around the the challenges that are coming and understanding where you are now. And I suppose it's one of the reasons that we'll talk about benchmarking with Farm Bench. It's why we developed the business impact calculator, so people put in their direct payments and see what the reductions are going to be, assuming everything stays as it is. But just in just point there about the for the average performer, or for typical farm business, it's going to be a challenge. What about people's ability to improve that performance? What's your take on that? Because you must see clients who can make some improvements and gains.
I would say most businesses haven't got opportunities to make the improvements. It's a question of whether they're actually prepared to grasp the nettle and actually make possibly some hard decisions. Now, if you look at whether it's the Farm Bench data or the university data that comes out, the difference between the best performing businesses and the average is quite stark. Certainly the Newcastle data up here, we're looking at differences between the best guys and the average guys of heading on towards £200 a hectare. Now, £200 a hectare is actually the BPS payment that you're getting at the moment. So my argument would be is everyone has got the opportunity to improve their business. Now, there might be some people at the very top that there'll be very much marginal gains, but there'll be, for the majority of farmers, I would say there's a great opportunity to do that. No idea what, each individual business will have their own area that they can improve. Now, whether it's actually improving productivity, reducing your variable costs, doing something about your labour and machinery costs, altering how you borrow money, no idea. But there's all those areas that there's opportunities to do that. And if you talk about Dave Brailsford and Sky and Ineos, where there's 1% here and 1% there, suddenly you've got a 10% improvement, and suddenly you've actually gone a long way towards overcoming the reduction in the BPS. The bottom line is you've got to start understanding where you are in the overall sector as to whether you've got massive improvements to make or whether you're actually only looking at marginal improvements.
Yeah, no, fair point, isn't it? I think when we did similar, we looked at that variation in performance for the livestock farms. You're looking at 50 grand difference between the top 25% and the bottom 25%.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's 100 grand. And the ability to change is. I really like that kind of Dave Brailsford and the Sky analogy about how you make small changes, because I think they all collectively add up. The trouble is they've got to add up to an awful lot to offset 230 odd quid a hectare.
The other interesting thing is if you actually look at the data, the benchmarking data, most livestock businesses do not get an awful lot of income from the environmental schemes that are around at the moment. So now that's partly down to the fact that certainly at the moment I don't actually feel the countryside stewardship scheme is that helpful for livestock farms and what options they've got available to use on livestock farms. Now, I'm hoping, so there's an element of a plea here to Chris, is the fact that when they're looking at the what options are going to be eligible under ELMS, that the livestock farmers aren't forgotten about, because quite often their biodiversity is actually very high to start with, a bit like the question you had at the start. So they need to get those payments there in the first place. But as it stands at the moment, I personally would think the majority of the reason why there's very little income coming, being seen in the benchmarking data for livestock farms is the actual schemes aren't actually helpful as they're setting out at the moment.
Okay, we'll perhaps come back to that point. I want to bring in Oliver from Barclays. So Oliver, I hope you're there and you can pop the camera on. Excellent.
Hopefully that's working, Phil.
Yeah, that's all great, thank you. Look, I'm conscious that, Barclays are a big supporter of British agriculture. Really interested to see, hear what their take is on an industry and a sector that's in for some big challenges and big changes. Still a big supporter in the next 5-10 years?
First of all, good afternoon, Phil, and thank you for having me, as my mother taught me to say when I was growing up. Big supporter. It's a big part of Barclays UK's business, UK agriculture, and that's an important factor to us because it does form a huge part of our debt book in the UK. Our view at the moment would be, as we've already discussed, as Chris himself has touched on, the detail is quite marginal at the moment. So there's obviously an awful lot of change coming along. The only thing we've got sort of set in stone at the minute is the BPS reductions coming down the line. And Robert's made a very valid point that Defra Farm Business Survey figures most livestock farmers, their income from agriculture, pure agriculture, is actually negative as an average. There's good and bad across the board, clearly, or at different ends of the spectrum. I think for us, we look at the new domestic ag policy and the direction of travel. It's not dissimilar from the direction of sort of global travel, the journey to net zero. We must reduce emissions. We must reduce greenhouse gases. So in some ways, it's excellent news that UK agriculture is going to get what feels like support on the journey to that net zero goal by 2040. And there are going to be an awful lot of help schemes that do come in for tech, for slurry management, which I might have missed it, Chris, but I don't think you mentioned the slurry management scheme. But that's something else that's going to come in. There's going to be some advice, and ELMS, we are promised, is going to go beyond the sort of stewardship and a lot of the ESA schemes were income foregone schemes. These ELMS is going to go above that. I suppose for us as a bank, the worry is that the current system, BPS system, apart from getting Robert to fill your form in, it's 100% addition to cash and to bottom line profit. And for us as a financial institution, in some ways, livestock, arable, dairy, beef, sheep, whatever you're doing is fascinatingly interesting to us. But what we basically want to know is, are you generating enough cash in order to, pay all your suppliers, draw some income for yourselves, and pay off your capital if you do have borrowed money or HP. So I suppose that tightening of BPS over the next 2 years will certainly focus minds, I think, Phil. And that's not a bad thing. We have got this 7-year period, and I'm old enough to remember when we went from the area and headage payments onto single farm payment scheme, and actually spent some time sitting in village halls doing projections of what was going to happen when you went from area and headage into SPS. And some of those graphs were really frightening, but the vast majority of farmers are still here. It's a really resilient industry. And it's a really adaptive industry, and we have great faith that the industry will push forward, push on, and make this a positive.
So bearing in mind that, I completely agree with you that we're a resilient industry, that we change and we adapt. So what kind of things are you seeing some of your customers and clients start to do to prepare for the change?
Certainly, a lot of them are investigating things like benchmarking. Duncan brought benchmarking up. I'll get off the subject of benchmarking shortly, Phil, or you do know we'll be here till like 5 o'clock tonight if I get on my soapbox about it. Benchmarking for me is a given. And the first start of benchmarking is basically getting out last year's accounts and this year's accounts and seeing what you did better at, taking some of the markets into account. I think people can start that off small scale. We are getting people who are looking at alternative forms of income, whether that's diversification, whether it's renewable energy projects. And we're getting people who are already reassessing, if we look, obviously it's livestock today, but, we're getting people in the arable sector who are looking at field mapping, maybe trying to map those areas of the farm that are less productive. Certainly in the grassland sector, again, Duncan's mentioned it. I think, there are areas of every farm that are not as productive grassland-wise in the livestock sector, and maybe those are areas that can be identified as generating elms income in the future. I think for me at the moment, looking at the technology that's available out there to help you, because benchmarking 20 years ago when I was in consultancy was a long drawn out job with a pencil and a very complex spreadsheet. These days there's so much information technology out there, it's really, really easy to get into and to get a foothold on, really. But I think for me it's about getting through that curve of change, getting through the sort of denial and frustration stage, and getting to that experiment, decision making and implementing. And the sooner any business can do that, the more viable and sustainable it will be in the long term.
Thanks, Sullivan. And again, I guess it's one of the things why as AHDB we did quite a lot around farm bench, being able to support benchmarking. We're doing more around performance indicators and trying to make it quicker, easier, more accessible. One of the things you mentioned there was time, and I just want to take this one back to Chris and then probably get a view from the rest of the panel. And it's a point that's made by Richard Packer on the questions is the direction of travel. I think we're kind of aware of. It's an industry broadly on board with. What's taken so long, and is there a risk that actually we're unable to make decisions? And I think Chris, you'll have a Defra viewpoint, but I'm sure the rest of the panel will have a view in terms of either themselves or businesses they're seeing to have to delay decisions. And so Chris, whether you want to come in first?
Yeah, sure. I guess I probably can't speak for the whole of the program, so I'll kind of focus on my bit of the animal health and welfare pathway, if that's okay. Certainly in terms of what we've been doing, and we're really keen on co-design. We've been working with industry through a number of groupings for over 3 years now, and I think part of what's taking so long is that we want to get this right, and we want to get it as right as we can up front, and as was mentioned earlier, to avoid any of those unintended consequences. And I think if we're doing that and actually genuinely working in a kind of co-design process, it does take some time to get that set up, to get everybody comfortable with their roles, and to kind of really establish that kind of deep trust that's needed for co-design to work properly. So I think kind of from my perspective, things, yes, to the outside world, things probably do seem like they're taking a lot of time. We are trying to make sure that this is right, and as I said in the presentation, we're probably not going to get it perfect straight away, but we want to get it as close as possible, and certainly to avoid any of the worst, to avoid any unintended consequences, which would be the worst outcome for everybody, I think.
Thanks, Chris. I suppose the flip side of that is done is better than perfect in some respects. So kind of interested in the panel in terms of Duncan, when would you want information by, and Robert and Oliver, when would kind of some of your customers, and I suppose yesterday is always the answer, but realistically, is there anything you're delaying or holding off or seeing being delayed just because of uncertainty?
I suppose we all want that information as good as possible, but in defence of what Chris was saying there, I'd rather it was good as quick. There is things we'd be holding off, but probably as a business ourselves, where HLS runs for another year, so, and there's an option to carry on. So we're not you know, we're very much a livestock-based farm. We don't have a lot of gear, so our investment wouldn't be like in whether we're buying another combine or not, because we never would buy another combine. And I think for ourselves, the more information and to see where we're going, more about sort of where we're going to be, whether we have to adjust borrowing structures. The quicker it would be, the better. But I'd rather it was right than run through too quickly. And I would rather work consulted with as well. So okay. I've got to say that's the point.
Yeah. Robert, Oliver, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll have to go next. I would agree. I prefer it to be right, but then my retort back to Defra is the fact that that's fine. Let's go through the process and a consultation. But why are you actually starting the process of reducing the BPS payments now, when there is no opportunity for anyone in the sector to actually get some money back to cover that shortfall, unless they're actually going to do it from their agricultural activities or their diversified income or whatever. Yes, I realise the sustainable farming incentive is going to start in some form next year, but we still haven't got a clue what that payment's going to be. So we're still sitting in the dark there about what we might have to do or might not be able to do to actually be able to overcome the shortfall in the payments. So the problem we've got is the fact that we've got downward pressure on incomes, which is not going to be helpful when I'm having my discussion with Oliver and my clients about working capital requirements next year. Very little to do, very little opportunity to increase that. And then also, because of the uncertainty, you're then in a situation, well, do we actually go and invest in something outside the industry to actually try and overcome this shortfall? Because you don't know whether that actually is going to be the right decision because of what might be another year down the line and what have you. So the concern I've got is, yeah, again, I fully appreciate from Chris's point of view, let's get it right. Absolutely, no problem with that. But why make the changes in terms of the BPS income now? Why not do that once we actually know what the true direction of travel is going forward?
I think for me, Phil, the potential for a funding gap that Robert talks about is something we're very aware about. You know, when we've struggled in the past with, you know, like BPS payments, things like that, that's a gap not just us, but you know, all banks are happy to step into to support the industry through a period of change. So we're quite aware of that potential, Robert. I think you know, as I alluded to, the only concrete in there at the moment is the reduction in BPS, and the rest is a little fuzzy at the minute. But I would agree with Duncan that, you know, it's better off right than quick. So, you know, as my father used to say when I used to break the stuff on the farm, oh, more speed, less haste. So it's better to get it right than create something that's broken from the outset. I think for us, you know, purely looking at it from a financial point of view, demand for bank debt year on year last year was 1.2% to the end of November. Now, that's in the face of a really strong milk price, a beef price that knocked 2019 out of the water, strong lamb price, and grain prices that were okay and are all currently sitting now. All the futures markets this side of the combines running are all over £200 a tonne. In that sort of circumstance, Phil, we would regularly see demand for debt for that investment, probably between 6 and 12%. So perhaps people are holding off a bit while they're looking at these sort of policy decisions. But you know, it makes it a difficult market for the bank to lend into. But I'm sure you won't shed too many tears for us, Phil.
Yeah, the other bit, Oliver, is I suppose it's really easy to take a snapshot of prices now, isn't it? And I know that if you're looking at where prices are, and particularly if you're kind of involved in the future policy design, you go, actually, look, the prices are in a pretty good situation. However, you need to look at farm businesses in the round, and we're all in it for the long game. So, you know, when I start thinking about some of the trade deals that are in the pipeline with the US, Australia, and New Zealand, look, the long term is about downward pressure and more competition on prices, and that's the future that I feel we've got to plan for. I just want to ask a quick question about advice. So it's one of the things that has been picked up on social media about farmers paying for advice on some of the some of the kind of basic or the kind of the environmental schemes. So probably again interested from Duncan in terms of your your willingness to pay for advice for some of these schemes, but Chris, from kind of Defra's perspective, any comment there on the kind of thinking behind farmers paying for a little bit of advice on that kind of entry level? So Duncan, do you want to go first in terms of the?
Yeah, I mean, we do now, and you know, I never begrudge paying for the advice for stewardship and BPS payments. If you get good advice, I mean, you know, I used to be a shearing contractor, and I could never guarantee the return on investment of what I pay the agent to do my forms. So within reason, I think it's fair enough that we should. I mean, some people do their own, but it is quite a good return on investment paying for a little bit of advice like that, I find. I'm happy with our system anyway. Yeah.
Chris, just anything on that? You know, kind of, because I suppose again it's been a bit of a talking point with, you know, farmers are going to have to shell out for advice. I suppose that, how does that tie in with the accessibility bit that you kind of talked about with getting schemes right?
Yeah, no, I completely get that, and I think so. I think certainly as part of environmental land management, you know, the farmers paying for advice is the approach that we have set out. I mean, I kind of hear Duncan's point about it. Yeah, it can be an investment in itself. So I think that's a good one, and I think certainly. I mean, I can tell that coming back to my environmental land management colleagues. I mean, from an animal health and welfare pathway point of view, one of the things that we are looking at is increasing the support for vets being on farm and working with farmers on improving their health and welfare. I think some of the devil's in the detail here a bit, and we're not ruling out supporting advice across the board. Certainly from an environmental management point of view, I think we are talking about farmers paying for advice, but certainly from kind of my perspective, we're not ruling out supporting vets and farmers working together more and improving animal health and welfare. I should say at this point that's not this is something we've heard very, very clearly, is that that's not about using public money to and forgive me for saying this is any vets on the line, but to line vets' pockets, and that's we've heard very clearly that that's not what industry wants to happen, and so we need to look very carefully at how we do use public money to help provide advice, so that it isn't seen as just going straight to advisors and not to farmers, which is obviously where I think we all see kind of really needing to go.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, fair point. I think in terms of making sure it's accessible for farmers, but yeah, and there's always that risk about funding heading elsewhere. Just one of the earlier
point, possibly, Phil.
Yeah,
my career has been 30 years of providing advice to farmers and things like that. So obviously, I'm, that's been my career. My concern, if anything, is actually having enough people out there to provide that advice. Because there is a farm consultancy, career out there, and I've been doing it for 30 years. And I've got a team of 12 people that work for me across the north of England. But we're recruiting 2 new graduates in this calendar year to boost our team in anticipation of needing more advice. But those guys, they're 4 or 5 years before they're actually going to be able to give good quality advice that Duncan is going to respect. And that is something that I'm concerned about, is where all these people are going to come from to provide that advice.
And Robert, one of the things that I suppose is inherent, certainly in terms of the environmental aspects as you move along, is that it's about farmers working together and getting things at a local level or landscape level. What kind of hurdles do you see in that?
Again, well, farmers are inherently not good at working together in the bigger picture. They will bend over backwards to help there. So Duncan no doubt will work with his neighbours or clipping time or whatever. But in terms of actually committing to the bigger projects and that inherently we have not been anything like as good as the guys across the pond in Central Europe. And that again is probably something that's going to have to change. And it'd be interesting to see what the results of some of these pilot schemes are, where farmers are working together under the own pilot, and that might well encourage others to do that. But inherently we're not good at working together.
Thanks, Robert. Look, I'm really conscious of time, so I just want, Chris, one of the questions that came in earlier on was just about how are you going to kind of measure stuff, and that's probably not the question to finish on necessarily, but we're talking about actions and interventions that are coming from policy. Just how effective is the management going to be, or the measurement going to be?
I mean, that is a huge question. I think the role of benchmarking, which has been mentioned earlier, I think we certainly see, or I certainly see that has a big role to play in the future, and I think it's really important. And Oliver, when you said about every farm should be benchmarking, super. I think what we want to do is to make sure that whatever measurement and however we are looking to measure success, it's done in a way that works for farmers and goes back to those points about being simple and accessible. It needs to be more about in my view, it needs to be more about the overall big picture result rather than the kind of minutiae of almost like measuring down to the nearest millimeter whether something's quite right or not. But that's probably where I should stop.
Okay. Yeah. So I suppose it's picking up on some of the flexibility that the changes in regulations are saying. It's not about penalising somebody for getting something wrong on a map. It's much more rewarding the behaviour, and is the measurement a proxy for it. One kind of final, if we just go around so Chris, we've kind of heard from you on a couple of things, but from Robert, Oliver and Duncan's perspective, so just thinking about the longer term, so thinking about farming's future kind of 6-7 years down the line, direct payments are effectively on that journey to being phased out. How confident are you about the industry's future in a nutshell?
So is that
okay? I'll give everybody the thinking time and blurt in first, shall I? Look at the relief on Robert's face and Duncan now. I actually, as an organisation and personally as an individual, 40 years since I started working at home on the farm when I was still at school. I know I don't look old enough. Genuinely, if we embrace this change and the journey to net zero tied into it, I genuinely think these are going to be the most exciting years in agriculture that I will have seen. Robert, sounds like we've sort of been involved in the professional aspects of the industry for roughly the same sort of time. I don't know whether you'd agree with that, but hugely confident in the ability of UK farms to adapt and change, and confident in the direction of travel if we embrace it and engage with it and embed it in future farm businesses.
Okay. Robert, your view then?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think the industry needs to embrace it. I think it needs to look at it as an opportunity, not a threat. Don't get too concerned about Chris's role, because what will happen. It will eventually come out. My most sort of parting comment would be, try and look at the things that you've got control over. And if you can actually do that and do that well, you've got a good fighting chance. You'll be in for an exciting few years, if not decades. So look at it as an opportunity.
Great, thanks, Robert. And Duncan, final word from you. Your kind of views on the future.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm homeschooling behind us, as you see there, so I've got the later generation to come in. I'm very, very positive about it. Probably as positive as I've been for a few years, actually, about where we're going with livestock and especially the grass-based system. I don't know. Like things have just started to give us a little bit more faith. I think the Brexit thing when I'm going through it was quite a worry. We're over it and we've just got to get on with life now. So I'm very positive about it, and we'll be looking to just keep on improving and hopefully get things going. I mean, I would say that I think if farmers try and take control within their farm gate, and they'd be amazed, especially, I know we've gone on a lot about benchmarking, but what falls out at the bottom, the information that falls out at the bottom when you start benchmarking, I think would surprise an awful lot of people. And I would, I always think that that's a great thing. We've been doing it for 12 years now, and it's been a big thing for us.
Good stuff.
Yes,
Thank
good.
you. Thank you, everybody. And kind of, I guess I'm conscious that we spend a lot of time talking about the changes to the 3 billion quid or so that comes into farming's revenue stream in the form of subsidies and support. Yet there's 20 billion plus that we get from selling the produce that we get. So I think there'll be lots more discussion about policy, and certainly we'll pick up more of the detail and more of the changes as they come online. But I'm conscious we have overrun a little bit, but I just want to keep the discussion going. So I just want to close by saying thanks to our speakers. All, thank you very much. That's been really helpful, really informative. I'm sure it's not the last time that you're all going to be speaking about farm policy. From an AHDB perspective, we will pick up kind of future announcements, future information in our market intelligence publications. So if you're not one of the 44,000 that are subscribed to our newsletters, please get in touch and we'll add you to the list. And there's no doubt we'll revisit some of the topics in future webinars and briefings. So look, that's it from me. Thank you again for everybody for joining us today. We have quite a few questions in that we haven't been able to answer. What we'll do is we'll try and ping those around the panel and see if we can get some of that picked up and published on AHDB website. Particularly quite a few, I think, that we're heading Defra's way in terms of the finer detail that might still be outstanding, but we'll see what information we can get with you there. As said, this has been recorded, so it will be sent to you in the next 24 hours and also be available online. And if you can complete the questions some at the end, that'd be great. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.